faith, family, freedom, hope, and opportunity. You're listening to Freedom Rings. I'm your host, Senator Marsha Blackburn. Well, welcome for another Freedom Rings podcast. So delighted that you're joining us and hope that you're continuing to follow on your favorite podcast service. And today we have a guest who really knows what freedom means and has grown up exercising his Bill of Rights and his love of freedom. Ronnie Barrett, Barrett Firearms. And you probably will think that sounds familiar, and yes, indeed it does. The Barrett 50 cal. That is what Ronnie created, and thank you for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
We are just so thrilled to have you. You know, it's so much fun to have people talk about what freedom means to them and how having our freedoms has impacted their life.
Indeed. Only in a country like this could I have been able to do the things I've been able to do.
Yeah, you know, my husband and I, for years, had this little ad that we tore out of a paper, and it was a light bulb, and it said, "I have an idea." And then as you go through, you have all the naysayers, and the bulb is dark. It's no longer a bright light. And I think, as I look at your story, that is very applicable. You grew up in Murfreesboro.
Yep, I was born there.
And went to high school there.
All public.
Born and educated.
Yeah, half raised, you know, so yeah, I was there all my life. And it's just been a wonderful place. I'm so fortunate to be born in Middle Tennessee.
Absolutely. And then you have been big in giving back to Middle Tennessee. You went into the photography business as a young man.
Well, I've had a job. During high school, I had a job for about 6 months at Delbridge Studios. It was a photography studio there in town. And it was a little seasonal job. After I left there, I started my own studio. First in the house, and they fixed up my garage, and then later on bought a little building downtown that I didn't have the money for the rent, but I figured I'd get there by the time the end of the month came. And so all of it has been like that, of having the faith and having the money. God always provided the money just in time to be able to meet just about every need that we ever had. And then it worked that way until now, still going on.
Yeah. And then in that photography studio, you grew that business, and you had a job one day to photograph a boat out on the Stones River.
Yes.
And let's talk about that story.
That was a riverine patrol boat that Boston Whaler and Ramo Gun Manufacturing here in Nashville. Ramo was building the only 50 cals since, I think, World War II. And so they got together and had produced a boat. Their photographer bailed out on them on New Year's Day or something. And so Pony Maples, E.R. Maples, who owned the company, called and said, "Ronnie, my photographer dropped out. Can you come and save us? We're photographing this gunboat down on Percy Priest Lake." Well, you can imagine what kind of strange views we got with that. But as we sat out there that day, I was looking at that big, beautiful 50, and I was a gun guy anyway, and I thought I'd love to have something that would shoot that cartridge, but I can't really afford a machine gun which eats up the ammo at 650 rounds a minute. And so I told Mr. Maples, I said, you know, I've got this idea that if I might just make a semi-automatic 50 cal rifle. If I did that, would y'all be interested in building a few, and maybe we could make some money? So, you know, what do you tell a 26-year-old kid, you know? So he said, sure, you know, we'll do that. Well, I took that very enthusiastically, went home and started sketching out on my art pad what each component would look like in 3D and all that kind of stuff as I kind of envisioned it in my head, and went around trying to find a machinist to make it. Of course, they'd say, well, kid number one, these aren't drawings, they're some sort of sketches, and I believe all the guns are made up north, aren't they? You know, I said, well, I don't know, I guess they are. But I finally found somebody. We had a little one-bay garage. Bob Mitchell had I don't even know if you could pull a car into it, so maybe it was a storage shed. But he had a mill and a lathe, And I would get off, I'd close the studio at 5 o'clock, run down to Smyrna, Tennessee, and if I could keep him up there till 2 in the morning, I would, and we'd be making parts in the little garage. And in 4 months, I had a shooting gun. So 2 months to draw it up, 4 months to make it,
and finding somebody that would say, not all the smart people have already done this.
yeah. If it was such a good idea, why wouldn't somebody smarter than you have done it? But you know, and I wasn't a big smart guy. I made D's and F's going through high school, and I was dyslexic, still am. Back then, all you knew is that you just got embarrassed a lot. But you know, after you realize that, oh, that's what I'm doing, I see that now. But you know, God picks some of the most unusual people to get things done, so you'll know it was God. And so that's kind of with me. You know, I'm not an engineer, I'm not a great businessman, but I sure have done well. You know, but I don't have the big head. I know who to give the glory to.
And instinct is a lot of that. And so you make the gun, and then you go to a gun show.
Well, you got to sell it, you know.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'd take out a little table at one of the little military shows. It was the ADPA back then, the American Defense Preparedness Association. And it wasn't expensive, you know, just a little tabletop display, sometimes out in a tent. And you put it up, and the Army guys would come by, or some of the other big developers, and they'd laugh at you, and they said, you know, kid, you're wasting your time, because before the Army or anybody could buy anything like this, you have to first start with a requirement document, a deficiency of some sort that requires something to be made. He said, coming out here and just showing this, you're just spinning your wheels. And you know, I said, well, you know, maybe if somebody sees it, they like it, maybe it'll work. Maybe it'll go from the bottom up instead of the top down. And the Association of the United States Army would be on display every year in Washington, D.C. But that booth space back in the 80s was like $16,000 a 10 by 10, and I couldn't do that. So I packed my photography van up with my rifle in it and went to D.C. That's one of those things you wouldn't do today, I guess.
Yeah.
But walked in, and I got admission into the meetings, and I came to where this guy had night vision display. Back then, night vision was pretty big. And he'd be over across the hall from a tank or a helicopter or something like that. And I come over and said, you know, nobody's looking at your booth, you know, and because they're all looking at that, I've got a gun out in the car that if you put that night vision on, people would look at the night vision on this big different gun, and maybe you could let me put a few of my brochures here. So we considered, he said, well, go get it and bring it on in. So we did, and so I had a display there for free. And well, not for free.
Opportunity.
Yes. So one year goes by, and I had four.
Yeah.
I had 4 different guns on display one year, and I still couldn't afford a booth. But it eventually began to catch on. People would, you know, come through and make the old joke, you know, well, what kind of squirrel gun is that? And they'd laugh, and then they'd come back around in about 15 minutes and say, you know, I've been thinking, if I had that, I could do this, I could do that. And they ended up selling themselves. So it wasn't long before the Marine Corps somehow or another had a rifle. The Army had a rifle. The Air Force EOD had a rifle that they had purchased on, you know, little small operational and maintenance money. And U.S. SOCOM had a rifle. And so we were starting to go around to the different bases and demonstrating what the rifle could do. And it was like nothing anybody had ever seen before. So when the first call for Desert Storm came out, everybody was all pumped and ready to move. The Marine Corps bought 100 rifles on the signature of the Commandant. That then allowed some of the Army guys and the SOCOM guys say, hey, we'd like that new Marine Corps gun. So let's send our money over to the Marine Corps, let them buy us another 100 or 250 or whatever. And so it goes. The rifle got bought the way I thought it would. If you make a good product, you know, and show it and offer good service, the business will come.
And having freedom And the opportunity to dream those big dreams is what really elevated this and
Yes,
gave
it
you
is.
the opportunity.
It really is.
So, and Barrett Firearms is located in Rutherford County.
In Murfreesboro, Tennessee.
And it
The
now,
center of the universe, you know. Center of the
there
state.
you go, center of the state. You're right on it. And now you employ how many people and make how many guns a year?
We, you know, we're still a small little company. We bounce between 100 to 130 direct jobs. And then there's another 300 Tennessee ancillary jobs with subcontractors and things like that. So it's, and how many we make, you know, that's a good question. I don't even know that. But we got, our gun eventually got adopted by the U.S. government and 70 other different governments. So, you know, from the UK to Germany to France to everybody, you know, we ended up bringing more foreign money to Tennessee than I think anybody would have ever imagined. And it's been a real great ride.
Well, and this is something I think is important. You just mentioned the 70 other governments. And as we talk about how we as Americans support freedom, fight for freedom, we also help other countries fight for their freedom.
That's right.
We don't go in and overtake them, but we help them. And other countries learn from what our military divisions do. And then they come as close to that as they can. So that foreign military sales is something that you participate in. Other countries want what you are making here.
That's right.
Made in the USA.
That's right. And so I can go anywhere in the world and just say, I'm Ronnie Barrett with Barrett Firearms. They go, I know you, I shot this, or my son was in the service and we shot their gun in their service. So it's been a magnificent ride to be able to be of service to some of the finest men and women, and those are the ones that are defending our nation and our allies' nation.
And Ronnie, how many different versions of the 50 cal do you have?
The original gun that I did when I was 26 is 2, I think, on that. Now, along the line, there have been, one government might have this modified a little bit differently, but it's still basically the same gun, but there's really kind of 2, one that is sound suppressor capable and one that is not. They look identical, it's just got a little bit different operating system in it. So, of that. But now, of the other models, we also have the Model 95, it's a bolt-action bullpup 50 caliber rifle, got adopted by Spain and Japan, so that's yet another totally different version. We have a Model 99 that was a civilian target recreational gun that my son Chris and I designed, mostly him. And then we have, most recently, and quite surprising, this is not a 50 cal rifle, but it's a bolt-action tactical rifle that was designed by my son Chris that ended up being, I'll have to say, the most accurate rifle in the world. It is just, he worked on it and spent more money and more money. You know, he said, Dad, you know, if we're gonna make the size hits we need at 1,500 meters, they all have to go in the same hole at 100 meters. Well, yeah, that's right, because if you shoot a 1-inch group at 100 meters, then at 1,500 meters, that'll be 15 inches, and you might miss your target at 15 inches. So he worked and tweaked and got a little bit of more accuracy here and a little more there and everything. So after it was all over, it did produce the most accurate rifle, and we'd carry it to a country. Norway was one of the first ones to pick up on that, New Zealand, Israel, and now the United States has just adopted Chris Barrett's gun. He now
and
becomes
you're the first father-son duo.
First father-son.
Yeah.
I was the 4th guy in the last 100 years to have his rifle adopted by the government, and my son Chris becomes the 5th man to have his rifle adopted by the U.S. government. So that's kind of fun.
And Chris, in developing his rifle, has helped solve another problem that the U.S. military has with just-in-time parts and having parts depots.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, his rifle is very unique. It's very modular. And so when we thought, well, who's going to be the depot on this? Who's going to be where the maintenance is going to be done. And the services look at it and go, we don't need any. This thing can be, the man in the field can change anything out without any specialty equipment.
Which keeps our troops safer.
Yes, it is.
And allows them faster response time.
Yep.
So I think that is so vitally important. Let me ask you about this too, because you don't just work all the time. You and Donna have been very involved not only in Rutherford County, but in the state, and you also serve on the NRA board.
Yes, National
Talk a
Rifle
little bit
Association.
about your NRA board service.
That has been a great introduction. You just don't know, I didn't know how wonderful, how great the NRA is. Of course, it's I guess it's the world's oldest civil rights organization. It's over 150 years old, and we have great programs, from disability programs to safety training, police training, marksmanship, range grants, just all sorts of things that we do, scholarships. So it is a huge organization, and we have 5 million members. Now, I don't know why we don't have 100 million members, because there's about 100 million people in the United States that own firearms, and I think they ought to all be members of the NRA. So
or
anyway,
how to use their gun.
yes.
Right.
And but we have just fantastic museums. We've got different museums in Fairfax, and then another one in Missouri, and things like that, of some of the more collectible things, from the famous movie guns to, it's just, the NRA is a fantastic thing, where we've had a convention or an annual meeting in Nashville a few years ago, and it was scheduled to be back in 2020 back to Nashville. Mm-hmm. And whenever we meet like that, it'll be about 80 to 85,000 of some of the best people you've ever wanted to meet, people that come together for 3 days and look at the exhibits and hear great speakers and get training and things. So the NRA has been a fantastic thing. I've served on the board now for board of directors since 2009, and I think we do a real good job.
Well, we appreciate what you do to defend the Second Amendment, and also what you are doing to teach young men and women how to properly use a firearm. So as we wrap up, what does freedom mean to you? What does it allow for you?
It has, if I was born in another country that may have a caste system, is that the correct word? I'd still be in my dad's cabinet shop. Wouldn't have been able to get out of that. I would be doing what I was born into. Instead, all along I felt that you could be anything you wanted to be. If you're an American, and if you dream that you want that, and if you want it bad enough, you'll get it. That this opportunity to be able to become whoever you'd like to become, as long as the government will stay out of the way. And I think, as far as a lot of governments go, we still do a nice job of doing that. You might feel like that the government gets in the way a lot, but you see some other countries and you realize we've still got it pretty good.
Yeah.
But the freedom to travel, to go from state to state, to travel to other friendly countries and not have to worry about it, that's just amazing. It's just great. I hope we always maintain that. This seems like some of the stuff that's happening, and today some things are getting upside down. What was viewed as wrong is now being viewed as right, and vice versa. And I'll tell you, our capitalistic way of doing business, and what our founding fathers put forward for us, that's the right path. That's the right direction for us to continue being on. And let's not recolor history and to trying to wipe that out and substitute our good way of doing things with something else.
Right. Freedom, free people, and free markets
That's
solve
right.
a lot of problems.
That's right.
Thank you so much for joining us for Freedom Rings podcast. I'm Marcia Blackburn, and keep up with us. You're going to find us at your favorite podcast provider. Ronnie Barrett, you've been a wonderful guest. Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Freedom Rings. You can follow me on Twitter at Vote Marsha, Facebook at Marsha Blackburn for Senate, and on Instagram at Team Marsha. And you can always find us online at marshablackburn.com. The Freedom Rings podcast is edited and produced by Jared Cummings. Executive producers are Conservative Partnership Center and Marsha Blackburn. Together, we make Freedom Ring.